Welcome to Public Health Matters, where we talk about what matters in public health. I'm Jane Goodman, Public Health Network Strategist with the Nashua Division of Public Health and Community Services. And before I welcome our special guest today, I'd like to give you a little bit of a COVID update. We're doing okay here in New Hampshire, but as you see from the United States map, things are getting a little bit more yellow on the West Coast, and to remind you, that's a medium community level of spread. So again, be aware we're entering into the holiday season, and take precautions if you're going to be with a large group of people, indoor crowded spaces. Think about using that mask. If you're hosting people at home, not a bad idea to open a window, get your air circulating. We do want people to enjoy the holidays, but enjoy them safely. And turning to our next slide, we do see the New Hampshire rates, Hillsborough County, which is that dark green spot in an outline. We're doing okay. We have low community transmission right now, but if you see just to the east, we have medium transmission in Rockingham County. So again, we are not out of the woods. Just make smart decisions. If you have any symptoms, use one of those home tests. The federal government is offering 4 more home tests to be ordered soon, so you can do that through the Postal Service. The bivalent booster is available. That protects against Omicron and the original strain of COVID-19. And we do recommend that people are getting that booster at least 3 months after infection or their last booster. And finally, before we get to our guest, a reminder that Paxlovid is available through telehealth, 1-800-818-5803. So if you do have that positive COVID test, you can call for an appointment if you're not able to reach your own provider. And with no further ado, I'd like to welcome our guest, Dr. Cynthia Whitaker. Welcome, Cynthia.
Thanks for having me, Jane.
So happy to have you here. Dr. Whitaker is the Executive Director, CEO, do we say?
CEO, yeah.
CEO of Greater Nashua Mental Health. And I'm so happy I had emailed you to say, hey, anyone can talk about seasonal affective disorder, and I landed the CEO. So thank you so much for giving us your time. We know how busy it is, especially around the holidays with mental health issues, behavioral health issues. The holidays can bring such joy for some people and not for everybody. So we brought you here to talk about that today.
Yes.
And something we call seasonal affective disorder, or with the acronym SAD, which again kind of makes me a little bit sad just thinking about it. But if we could just talk about, as we enter into the holiday season and into these darker months really too.
Right.
You know, what is seasonal affective disorder? And I want to hopefully give our audience permission to understand that it's okay if that's something that affects them.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. I did try to suggest somebody else come, and it just didn't work out for a few people. And I'm sure I could have twisted an arm or two, but it is a topic I've talked about before. So my pleasure to be here.
It's great. Thanks.
So I think it's important when we talk about seasonal affective disorder to recognize that it actually can mean 2 different things. Mm-hmm. So the first is to recognize it's actually not a diagnosis in our DSM-5, so which is the diagnostic statistical manual that mental health clinicians use to create diagnoses. So it can be what we have as a qualifier of a major depressive disorder diagnosis.
Okay.
So people can have a major depressive disorder with seasonal pattern.
Okay.
Which can actually mean a winter pattern or a summer pattern. There are some people who have more depression in the summer months, not the winter months.
Okay.
But here in the Northeast, we often talk about seasonal affective disorder to mean maybe not major depression that happens with a seasonal pattern, but just what happens when we don't get enough vitamin D, what happens when we are inside more because of bad weather or cold or darkness at night, where we just have that feeling of depression or dysphoria, but maybe it doesn't include things like thoughts of self-harm like depression would be. So it's a tricky term because people really use it to mean those 2 different things.
Right.
So that's I think a good place to start.
Yes. So let's start with the one that is not a DSM, is not
Not major depressive disorder.
Not major depressive disorder, because I think that more people may, it might be a sign of something, and I think that's what we're trying to say is like, this is a real thing, but you don't necessarily have to have a diagnosis for it, but you might want to recognize it and take some precautions and do something about it.
Exactly. So people, especially in our kind of New England region, where we have longer nights that are cold too, tend to have vitamin D deficiencies, just not get as much sunlight. And those things alone kind of can impact our energy levels, our just, feelings of energy, happiness. And so it is very common if somebody has that kind of experience, a vitamin D deficiency specifically, to have that feeling. And so if it's kind of at that level where you feel like you can still get through the day, but maybe you're overeating and not having as much energy, or not, the things you might usually get joy from don't give you joy, you might want to think about, do I talk to somebody or consider vitamin D? How might I get out more and push through, as we might say here in New England, and reach out to somebody and just have a conversation and connect with someone. And that might be just enough to help somebody get through. Because I think, what we do often is, instead of making a decision, we follow our feelings, right? So if I decided every day I'm just going to follow my feelings, and I feel like meh today, I might never make it to work.
Right.
Right? But I have to sort of decide, or even pre-decide, last night before I went to bed, I'm going to get up, and even though it's going to be snowy where I live, it's going to be rainy here, and I'm going to come, and I'm going to sit with Jane, and we're going to have this conversation. Even if when I wake up, it's like, oh, I don't want to do that. So kind of getting motivated.
Make that list almost the night before, whether it's mental or write it down, or do those kind of things to just say, this is what I need to do today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I feel that way sometimes with, now I don't know if it's a sign or a symptom, but it is very hard to force myself outside right now. And I don't know if it's because I'm getting older, or just, it's much easier to let the dog just run in the yard rather than take a nice walk, which I love to do with the dog, but I just don't want to leave. It's especially on a day like today, where it's really gross out. But forcing yourself, like today, I'm going to take that dog. I'm going to get my dog out and do the things that I like to do, or maybe just, I think that's such a good idea to have that to-do list, even if they're difficult tasks.
Yeah. And maybe it's not take the dog for a mile walk. Maybe it's simply take the dog for a walk down the driveway or around the block. One of the advice my grandmother used to give was 20 minutes outside every day. And she's lived by it and did really well through her life. And so I try to live by that, like, okay, dog, maybe we're not going for the 40-minute walk, but how can we be outside for 20 minutes?
Right, just to get that fresh air. And I always find I feel better after doing that. I was like, oh, it wasn't so bad. I wasn't really cold.
There's actually been some studies looking at the difference between exercising inside and exercising outside, specifically on symptoms of depression. And both are good. But being outside actually has even more benefits. You can do less strenuous exercise and have the same benefits just because you're outside in nature.
Wow.
So again, part of why we don't do as well in this part of the region, because we're not outside as much in the cold winter months. So
we gotta have cross-country skis.
Right,
and you can't always do that. Yeah. Or snowshoes, or just something to get out there. And that's what I found. You have to be a little bit more creative, because I can't stand on cross-country skis, but I can work on snowshoes. And so that's kind of just been like a substitute for me. Or a less expensive way is just those, I think I got them for $3, but like the little crampons I can put on my boots. And that way I'm not gonna fall, because that's another thing people worry about, I think, too, with the snow and the ice and, just safety. So
I often think about if there's something that you're worried about, like, because I do think like falling, and is it safe to walk? Might I fall? You know, is there a way? Can you ask yourself that question? Like, how might I decrease my anxiety? Or what would it take for me to feel safe? And maybe it is something as simple as, you know, those little things you put on your shoes.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's, well, I feel safe to walk up and down the driveway 3 times, but not out in the street. But is there some question you can ask yourself of, how can I still get outside?
Right.
At
And
this
don't
time?
use safety as an excuse, maybe.
Yes.
Just use that as, you know, take stock of it. And it's okay to do less, but like you said, just do something.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I love that. I'm going to make my list tonight. I just hope it's not raining tomorrow. But I did also want to ask you, because I've heard about this, some people use like a light box. Is that something?
It is.
that
It is
works?
definitely something. And there's all kinds of them available now. But you know, again, for us here in this part of the country, for sure, light boxes, light therapy of all different kinds, can be helpful for people.
Yeah, so you just kind of sit in front of it for a certain amount of time, chill out, have your coffee, but let that light shine on you. Does it help create vitamin D? Because, you know, we know sunlight, you know, you don't have to take supplements if you get enough sun. But if you are using that light box, will that produce that vitamin D that you need?
I mean, it's more complicated, certainly, because
Yeah.
it depends on a person's individual body and,
Sure.
you know, how it works and stuff. But in theory, yes.
Okay.
And there's just something about the light, too. I think we're also very prone to, I'm going to go home because it's cold and I'm going to put on my blanket and I'm going to sit and watch TV, and I do it with the lights off. Right?
Oh,
Even
that's a
that's
good point.
more darkness. You know, so even if it's not light therapy, even just having lights on, right? Because our bodies are in tune to, there's light, it's bright, versus it's dark. Even just the way our bodies react to that. Again, not everybody, it's not that simple, but
Yeah, but it's a really good point, because you don't think about that. Like, I am prone to doing that. Like, this is all about me. We're just going to analyze me today here. Little case study. But you don't think about that. You do go home. I do put that blanket on. I do sit in front of that TV.
right,
Like,
with the
I'm
lights
human.
on. Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
So.
Right, which
So
has
I'll
its
have to-
place too. It's good, but
Yeah. But maybe not right after work, so I fall asleep on the couch.
And I think one of the difficulties of using the term like seasonal affective disorder or even depression, like we talk about, the word depression really represents a continuum from kind of feeling down and blue to, you know, really having thoughts of harming oneself. Is that the treatment or the prevention for one is different from the other, right? So if somebody is in that kind of spectrum, if you will, of seasonal affective disorder that is legitimate, truly exists, but isn't to that level of major depressive disorder, the interventions of things like medications aren't going to be helpful.
Right. So it's really that self-help at this point.
Exactly.
And maybe even noticing it in our family members too. You know, and if they're complaining or, like you said, low energy, kind of sitting on the couch all day, or, you know, not really moving a lot, suggesting a walk, or, you know, let's get outside. Let's go.
Let's
do
go walk
something.
together.
Yeah, go for a drive,
Right.
or just something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just notice that in others. So as we talk about the holidays and going into the holidays, we kind of sometimes talk that it can be very difficult for people who have a depressive disorder. So what can we do, or what kind of things can people look out for if you are in that situation? I guess I want people to know, like, this is normal to have that exacerbation almost, or, you know, are there tools that you can suggest?
The holidays are a tough time for a lot of people, and they can be very activating because of certain memories we have or things we associate with them, and then, you know, maybe there's a loss and it looks different than it did before. And so it's very common for people who might be joyful to be a little depressed, and for people who have a depressive disorder to feel even worse. And so while that exacerbation is normal, people don't have to live with it. That this treatment that typically can help depression, can help even during this maybe harder season for people. But the things to look out for are just changes, like changes in appetite. So does somebody go from eating a lot to not wanting anything, or vice versa, from eating pretty healthy to all of a sudden not caring at all? That shift in appetite or eating is often a sign.
Okay.
Certainly another is the level of energy. So what is somebody typically like, and then are they experiencing a big change in that? And again, the best thing to do is to ask. Are you experiencing something? Again, there's lots of research and things that say, simply having somebody ask, like truly wanting to know the answer, not the how are you doing, where I want you to say fine because I don't really have time for the answer, which happens a lot in our society, but to genuinely ask, gee, I notice something's going on. Is there something behind that for you? Or, how can I help you? Or what if we just go out too, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes people don't know how to answer that question.
Right.
How can I help? It's better to just maybe say, why don't we do something together, or here's something for you.
And when you're in that kind of phase, do you sometimes just not even realize it? And so that's why I think that the benefit of having someone notice it and reach out is so important, because you might just kind of be wallowing in something that you don't even notice. I mean,
yeah.
I think beyond a funk, obviously.
Well, and often it builds over time, right? Like one of the things we often talk about is there's a downward spiral, right? So I might shift my eating, and then I'm eating worse, and then my body physically feels worse. So then I feel mentally worse. So then maybe I'm not sleeping as well, or maybe I've got stomach upset, or and then it just spirals downward, right? But there's also an upward spiral.
Sure.
And so how might we as family members, as caregivers, kind of, okay, if we go for a walk today, if I prepare you a healthy meal, right, we can start somebody or help provide them a way to upward spiral as well. But often people don't see those small steps downward or those small steps upward.
Right.
Until they're bigger. And so, it is easier sometimes for others to notice.
Yeah, and I always say, when we want to make change in anything, whether it's an organization, in our lives, or whatever, people say, I'm here, and I want to get to here, and I always think, well, it's okay then if you get to here next. You just get that little incremental change, because big change is a lot of little changes. And so I think we have to remind people not to be so hard on themselves and to take those baby steps, because every little bit, like you said, is cumulative.
Exactly.
So that just gives people that, and then you start to lift a little, hopefully.
Right. And it might be that the season is hard. And so it's not about being as joyful as you would be in the summer, but figuring out how do I get through this in the best way I can, in a way that doesn't lead to something worse.
Sure. And I think that is very challenging living in New England. When we leave our offices at 5 o'clock, it's pitch black outside, and it's cold, like you said. So, I love having this conversation, because I said, I'm the case study today. So, but another thing you did mention self-harm, and you did mention reaching out to people. So one thing that I learned from one of my coworkers is, it's okay to ask someone about self-harm. It's not going to make them harm themselves.
Correct.
And we're, of course, talking about suicide and other things. And we had talked a little bit before we started, is that something that elevates during the holidays? What signs and symptoms can we look out for, again, in our loved ones around suicide and self-harm?
So certainly, again, right, the holiday, the season can be harder and exacerbate things for people. The things to really, the correlates are really around hopelessness, right? When people feel like there's no hope, it's the only choice. And it might not make sense to the rest of us, but that feeling is really tied strongly to thinking about suicide or self-harm of any kind. And so listening, right? You have to listen for that. Nobody's just going to come out and say, I feel hopeless, right? They'll start using language that includes things like always, right? I'm always at the bottom. I'm always, out of luck. I always am the last one, or I never get anything, or, my job is terrible, I'm stuck. Right? That's other words. When people start using that language that just has no hope. Now, we all do that often as a reaction to something.
Right.
But then
Little drama, yeah.
But then we quickly maybe use our emotional intelligence or our like, okay, well, it's not really always, or it's not really never. It's kind of like we have to get it out and react, but then we can shift. I'm talking about, does that shift not happen, right? So that's really something to look out for. And it's okay to ask. It certainly is. I know, certainly we were in the past really afraid. A lot of
people think
are
it's like
afraid.
the power of suggestion. And I actually, when I heard that, like it's okay. Like you're not going to make them hatch a plan because you asked or anything. So I just think that's such an important message to people. It's be there for people.
Exactly. And luckily, the other thing I think is that there are a lot of people who want to be there for people. So even if it feels, if you're a friend, a family, and you're like you maybe have your own stuff, and so sitting with somebody in their stuff might be too hard, because we have to be mindful of everybody's safety. But there are other resources, so we're lucky, that the federal government went nationwide with 988 as a helpline, which you can, call, you can text. There's also nh988.com where you can chat online.
Okay, that's a good resource to know about too.
And then there are other what we call warm lines as well, right? Because that's really suicide prevention, emergency, like 911 to that level. But many peer support. So there's a New Hampshire Mental Health Alliance, and they track like what are the different warm lines throughout the state. So there's different places where there's peers available or people available to talk, like from 5 to 10 at night, many of them, to people. There are lots of people that want to help, and people just don't usually know how to access them.
Yeah, and that 988, I always remind people, like one of the, now we have to dial 603 with all of our, and everyone's probably scratching their heads, like, why? Part of the reason was so that we could have that 988 emergency number.
Exactly.
So, everyone's doing their part now by having to dial their area codes so that we can have this line. It's so important.
It is so important.
And it's so much more appropriate. You don't want to call 911. You want to call and get the right help at the right time. So, we don't want an ambulance coming. We want, a counselor on the phone or a peer that can talk to someone. So lastly, I read your article about psychological safety, and I loved it. So first you have to tell me what I know what it is now because I read the article, but tell everyone else what psychological safety is and how it relates to our upcoming holidays.
So thank you for reading it. So psychological safety essentially means an environment in which I feel safe to be myself, right? That, and there's a lot of research that has been done specifically in the workplace, how to create a psychologically safe workplace. And it means like that I feel like I can make mistakes and not be reprimanded for them. I can speak up with an idea that might be different and not feel ridiculed or judged, or I can simply be different and not be ridiculed or judged, and I can be me. And a lot of times in the workplace, we put a lot of pressure on leaders to create that space. But kind of thinking about just what's happening in our world, there's also like, well, what does psychological safety look like around the holiday dinner table with our families? Right? And if somebody's coming thinking, oh, I want to talk about this politic or this, that, or whatever it might be, is that really creating psychological safety and space for everybody there? So how do we want to show up to our families, whether they're usually joyful or not? How do we contribute to making the space better for everybody? you know, and less judgment, less assumptions. One of the quotes, I guess, of myself in that article is, a person's not defined by their belief on one topic. So, you know, if Uncle whoever comes to the table with some strong political belief, well, he's still your uncle and he still has other parts of him that are good. How do we maybe put that piece that's frustrating or whatever to us over here and appreciate the other parts of him?
And how do we make sure that how do we make sure that Uncle whoever behaves? Because because this is a thing, you know, a lot of families have not gotten together. Some are just getting together for the first time in 3 years, believe it or not. Or, I mean, I guess people did last year a little bit, but there's still some, especially with the older population, maybe not getting together. I know we had Thanksgiving for the first time in many years, and we did not talk politics. I don't know how it happened because there were a lot of us. But even, you know, getting together in communities with other friend groups, and you know that there's differing views. So, you know, do you set ground rules? Like, how do you go about that?
Yeah, I think you have to know who's coming and what it looks like, because I think for some people, we certainly could say, you know what, we want to have an enjoyable time today. Let's not talk about these topics today. Let's all agree. Or sometimes we can just take ownership to ask a different question, right? Like if it starts to go off in another way, we could just say, what's something that you're grateful for? What's the best thing that happened in your day today? What are you grateful for in this past week of, you know, or this past month? Or what's the lesson you learned in 2022 that you want to carry into 2023? How do we just ask a different question?
Yeah, kind of just steer the conversation a little bit different.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that whole psychological safety and like that event, because we want to enjoy the holidays and we don't want to fight, and we have enough of that in the media. And
Exactly.
you want to, you know, just enjoy your company, enjoy your kids or your parents or whomever you have for those holidays, and make it, you know, warm. And that's where the magic happens, right?
Exactly.
In the holidays is that warmth of family and friends and getting together and feeling safe.
Exactly.
Because if you can't feel safe with those people, where are you going to go?
Exactly.
So, well, thank you so much, Cynthia, Dr. Whitaker, for coming on. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Talking us through and giving us some tips for the holiday season. And I hope you'll come on again.
Sure.
Or send someone else if you don't want to. But I do really appreciate it.
Thank
so
you.
Thank you,
Jane.
And I hope you have a great holiday, whatever it is you're celebrating.
Thank you so much. You too.
Thank you. And I just want to remind folks that we do have a clinic at 18 Mulberry Street. We have immunizations and lead testing on Tuesdays and Fridays from 4 to 7 and 9 to 12 p.m. Excuse me. So we have morning and evening clinics, and we have a sexual wellness clinic every Thursday from 3 to 6 p.m. You do need an appointment to attend our clinics. We do not do walk-ins anymore, so that's 603-589-4500, option 2. I hope you'll all have an amazing season, and just remember, public health matters.